Yes, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for terror. Stay tuned for shivers and excitement. Listen to Craig Dennis in The Boogeyman Will Get You. Written by Robert Bloch for Weird Tales magazine and adapted by the author especially for this program. You'll hear it now if you stay tuned for terror.
It began as the perfect weekend vacation. Spent the night in a ghost town. What could possibly go wrong? It was great fun until the nightmare began. Then you can't run. You can't hide. You cannot escape. And you never look back. Because someone or something is waiting for you, watching. And you trust no one. Because no one comes out of this town alive.
And now, here is Craig Dennis in The Boogeyman Will Get You.
Afraid of the dark, aren't you? Oh, but you are. I know all about you. Do you understand? You were afraid of the dark when you were a child. Not because of robbers or thieves or murderers. Children don't think of such things. You were afraid of the dark because of the boogeyman. That's the name your parents used. Boogeyman. One of those smart, sophisticated, grown-up words. But there is terror behind it. When you were a child, you knew what the boogeyman looked like. You would see him in your dreams. That black, grinning shape with the wicked red eyes and the clutching claws. You heard his buzzing voice mumbling to you in sleep when you had nightmares. And you'd wake up screaming for your mother. You did scream, didn't you? Now that you're grown up, you laugh about it. But deep down inside, you're still afraid. You say you don't believe such things? It's all superstition. Then why are you still afraid of the dark? Why do you keep the lights on when you're home alone at night? I'll tell you why. Because you know it's true. There are such things as monsters. There are such evil beings. And the boogeyman will get you if you don't watch out. Well, what do you think of it?
Marvelous. I don't know how you do it, Walter.
Great stuff. You say it's part of a new essay?
That's right. Looks like I'll have it finished this week.
But, Walter, you work too hard. Cooped up all day long in that cottage of yours. Why don't you relax?
That's just why I rented the cottage. To stay cooped up and get some work done. The book doesn't write itself, you know.
I don't see how you fellas do it. Writing, I mean. Me, I'll stick to the insurance business.
Life insurance must be a wonderful thing.
Mean to tell me you're not insured, man?
Well, wait a minute now, darling. Walter, you'll have to excuse that husband of mine. He's always trying to sell something. Louis, let the poor man alone. We invite him over here tonight for a visit, remember?
I appreciate it, too. You folks are very kind to ask me in, but I'm apt to bore you with my essays.
Bore me? Oh, nonsense. You nearly scared me stiff.
Is that why Nancy isn't around? Do I scare her, too?
Oh, of course not. The child's probably out with her gang. You know, the Bobby Sox crowd.
Nancy is a very remarkable young woman. She didn't strike me as a typical member of the younger generation at all.
Well, she isn't really. Nancy is very mature for 17. Too mature, I'm afraid. Sometimes she comes out with something that surprises me.
Really?
Yes. Now take what she was saying about you the other day. Oh, guess I put my foot in at that time.
Nancy said something about me? What was it?
Oh, nothing at all. Matter of fact, I've forgotten just exactly what it was.
Please, tell me. I won't be offended. I'm curious. I've noticed that daughter of yours watching me, and I've wondered about it.
Well, you'll have to excuse her, Walter. She's just a kid after all. She said, well, we were talking about why we never saw you in the daytime, out on the tennis court or at the beach. And she said, that's not so strange. Vampires always sleep in the daytime.
Vampires?
Don't adolescents get the funniest notion sometimes?
Yes, they do.
She's awfully interested in you, really, Walter. After all, you're handsome, stranger here at the resort, an older man. I do believe she's getting a crush on you, but tries to hide it by crazy remarks.
Calling you a vampire? Where does she get such ideas? Reads too many books, I'd say.
Yes.
Sly kid, though. I asked her why she thought you were a vampire. Know what she said?
What did she say?
Said it was because you didn't eat any food.
She said what?
Nancy said she'd asked around town at the grocery store and the butcher shop, and that you never bought any food.
I shut her up in a hurry, though. Young lady, I said, apparently you don't know much about bachelors' eating habits. Did you ever hear of places called restaurants? You should have seen the look on Nancy's face when Why, hello, Nancy. We were just talking about you.
So I heard. Well, your manners, dear. Aren't you going to say hello to Mr. King?
Good evening, Nancy.
Nancy, Mr. King spoke to you. Nancy, what are you doing, child?
She's making the sign of the cross, an ancient custom. It's supposed to ward off vampires.
That's a good one. Well, young lady, how come you were running around in the dark tonight? Aren't you afraid of evil spirits?
Don't joke about things you don't understand, Father. Nancy, that's no way to talk to your father. Where were you?
Oh, just walking. With Billy Leggett. Up in the hills under the hemlock trees.
I suppose that's where you lost your scarf, young lady.
Oh, yes, I didn't know I'd lost it.
Well, folks, I've got to be running along. It's getting late.
So soon?
Yes, it's getting a little late.
All right, Walter. See you around. You sure you don't mind walking home alone?
Oh, of course not.
Maybe we could send Nancy along with you to protect you from vampires.
Nancy was a silly little girl. I knew it. But still, she upset me. Maybe it was because she was so beautiful and she hated me so. Thought I was a vampire. Just a silly little girl with a queer idea in her pretty head. I wondered what she was trying to do. At night, when I got back to the cottage, I found out. I stood in front of the door and saw something lying on the path. It was Nancy's scarf. What had she been doing here? She said she had gone for a walk to the hills, by the hemlock trees. There was her scarf. And as I opened the door, my hand touched something. A wreath on the doorknob. A wreath of hemlock. Hemlock. That's what you put on the door to keep vampires away. I thought about it all night. What was that girl up to? The next day I investigated a little. I found out plenty. Nancy had spread talk all over the village. Talk about me, about my habits, how I stayed in all day and came out at night, about my not eating at home. She'd even tried to call New York to check up on me, whether I really had a job and so on. She told the minister I didn't dare come to church and said I had no mirrors in my house because a vampire couldn't look into mirrors. This wasn't funny anymore. The foolish kid was making trouble for me. Somehow she had this mad obsession about vampires. I had to talk to her. That night I started over for her place, but before I arrived, I ran into her by accident on the path.
Oh, you startled me.
Sorry, Nancy. I didn't mean to frighten you. But say, I've been looking for you. Let's take a walk, shall we?
Well, really, Mr. King, I have a date.
Only for a few minutes, my dear. Why so formal? Call me Walter. By the way, I seem to have a speck in my eye. Have you a mirror in your purse?
A mirror? Why, yes. Here it is.
Oh, good. Let's see. There, I've got it. Thank you.
You looked into the mirror.
Of course. And I found that hemlock on my doorknob last night, too. Oh, don't look so startled, Nancy. I know all about your ideas. You thought I was a vampire, didn't you? Just because I work all day and eat in restaurants and walk at night. But you're wrong. You know that now, don't you? I look in mirrors, touch hemlock, and all the rest.
Yes, I see. I guess you think I'm an awful fool, Walter.
Not at all. I think you're a very lovely girl. I wish it wasn't so dark out here so I could see your hair. You have beautiful hair, Nancy. Look, the moon is rising. I can see you now. Nancy, you aren't afraid of me anymore.
No. Walter, I never was afraid. Not really. I just thought up all this vampire stuff to make you notice me. And besides, all vampires are tall and dark and handsome, like you.
You're a very clever little girl, Nancy. Very clever. Only I wish you hadn't gone to the police today.
Police? Then you know?
Yes, I found that out, too. A search warrant for my house.
Oh, but that was all a joke. And you aren't really a vampire, so it doesn't matter. When they come, we'll laugh at them.
I'll laugh at them. You won't.
Walter, what are you doing? Let go of me. Walter, what's happening to you? You're changing. Walter!
Too bad you were such a meddling little fool, Nancy. I can't let you get away now. It would spoil everything. You guessed too much.
Oh, Walter, let me go. Walter! Oh, good heavens! Then it is true. You are a vampire.
No, my dear. I'm not a vampire. I'm just a werewolf.
You have just heard Craig Dennis in The Boogeyman Will Get You, written by Robert Bloch, author of stories in Weird Tales magazine.
Stay tuned for terror.
Tales of H.P. Lovecraft. The Outsider. That night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests, with shade and form of witch and demon and large coffin worm, were long benightmared. John Keats. Unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness. Wretched is he who looks back upon lone hours in vast and dismal chambers with brown hangings and maddening rows of antique books, or upon odd watches in twilight groves of grotesque, gigantic, and vine-encumbered trees that silently wave twisted branches far aloft. Such a lot the gods gave to me, the dazed, the disappointed, the barren, the broken. And yet I am strangely content and cling desperately to those sear memories when my mind momentarily threatens to reach beyond, to the other. I know not where I was born, save that the castle was infinitely old and infinitely horrible, full of dark passages and having high ceilings where the eye could find only cobwebs and shadows. The stones in the crumbling corridors seemed always hideously damp, and there was an accursed smell everywhere, as of the piled-up corpses of dead generations. It was never light, so that I used sometimes to light candles and gaze steadily at them for relief. Nor was there any sun outdoors, since the terrible trees grew high above the topmost accessible tower. There was one black tower which reached above the trees into the unknown outer sky, but that was partly ruined and could not be ascended, save by a well-nigh impossible climb up the sheer wall, stone by stone. I must have lived years in this place, but I cannot measure the time. Beings must have cared for my needs, yet I cannot recall any person except myself, or for anything alive but the noiseless rats, bats, and spiders. I think that whoever nursed me must have been shockingly aged, since my first conception of a living person was that of something mockingly like myself, yet distorted, shriveled, and decaying like the castle. To me, there was nothing grotesque in the bones and skeletons that strode some of the stone crypts deep down among the foundations. I fantastically associated these things with everyday events and thought them more natural than the colored pictures of living beings which I found in many of the moldy books. From such books I learned all that I know. No teacher urged or guided me, and I do not recall hearing any human voice in all those years, not even my own. For although I had read of speech, I had never thought to try to speak aloud. My aspect was a matter equally unthought of, for there were no mirrors in the castle, and I merely regarded myself by instinct as akin to the youthful figures I saw drawn and painted in the books. I felt conscious of youth because I remembered so little. Outside, across the putrid moat and under the dark mute trees, I would often lie and dream for hours about what I read in the books, and would longingly picture myself amidst gay crowds in the sunny world beyond the endless forest. Once I tried to escape from the forest, but as I went farther from the castle, the shade grew denser and the air more filled with brooding fear, so that I ran frantically back lest I lose my way in a labyrinth of nighted silence. So through endless twilights I dreamed and waited, though I knew not what I waited for. Then in the shadowy solitude my longing for light grew so frantic that I could rest no more, and I lifted entreating hands to the single black ruined tower that reached above the forest into the unknown outer sky, and at last I resolved to scale that tower, fall though I might, since it were better to glimpse the sky and perish than to live without ever beholding day. In the dank twilight I climbed the worn and aged stone stairs till I reached the level where they ceased, and thereafter clung perilously to small footholds leading upward. Ghastly and terrible was that dead, stairless cylinder of rock, black, ruined, and deserted, and sinister with startled bats whose wings made no noise. But more ghastly and terrible still was the slowness of my progress. For climb as I might, the darkness overhead grew no thinner, and a new chill as of haunted and venerable mold assailed me. I shivered as I wondered why I did not reach the light, and would have looked down had I dared. I fancied that night had come suddenly upon me, and vainly groped with one free hand for a window embrasure that I might peer out and above and try to judge the height I had attained. All at once, after an infinity of awesome, sightless crawling up that concave and desperate precipice, I felt my head touch a solid thing, and I knew that I must have gained the roof, or at least some kind of floor. In the darkness I raised my free hand and tested the barrier, finding it stone and immovable. Then came a deadly circuit of the tower, clinging to whatever holds the slimy wall could give, till finally my testing hand found the barrier yielding, and I turned upward again, pushing the slab or door with my head as I used both hands in my fearful ascent. There was no light revealed above, and as my hands went higher, I knew that my climb was for the nonce ended, since the slab was the trapdoor of an aperture leading to a level stone surface of greater circumference than the lower tower, no doubt the floor of some lofty and capacious observation chamber. I crawled through carefully and tried to prevent the heavy slab from falling back into place, but failed in the latter attempt. As I lay exhausted on the stone floor, I heard the eerie echoes of its fall, but hoped, when necessary, to pry it open again. Believing I was now at a prodigious height, far above the accursed branches of the wood, I dragged myself up from the floor and fumbled about for windows, that I might look for the first time upon the sky and the moon and stars of which I had read. But on every hand I was disappointed, since all that I found were vast shelves of marble bearing odious oblong boxes of disturbing size. More and more I reflected, and wondered what hoary secrets might abide in this high apartment, so many eons cut off from the castle below. Then unexpectedly my hands came upon a doorway, where hung a portal of stone, rough with strange chiseling. Trying it, I found it locked, but with a supreme burst of strength, I overcame all obstacles and dragged it open inward. As I did so, there came to me the purest ecstasy I have ever known. For shining tranquilly through an ornate grating of iron and down a short stone passageway of steps that ascended from the newly found doorway was the radiant full moon, which I had never before seen save in dreams and in vague visions I dared not call memories. Fancying now that I had attained the very pinnacle of the castle, I commenced to rush up the few steps beyond the door, but the sudden veiling of the moon by a cloud caused me to stumble, and I felt my way more slowly in the dark. It was still very dark when I reached the grating, which I tried carefully and found unlocked, but which I did not open for fear of falling from the amazing height to which I had climbed. Then the moon came out. The most demoniacal of all shocks is that of the abysmally unexpected and grotesquely unbelievable. Nothing I had before undergone could compare in terror with what I now saw, with the bizarre marvels that sight implied. The sight itself was as simple as it was stupefying, for it was merely this. Instead of a dizzying prospect of treetops seen from a lofty eminence, there stretched around me on a level through the grating nothing less than the solid ground, decked and diversified by marble slabs and columns, and overshadowed by an ancient stone church whose ruined spire gleamed spectrally in the moonlight. Half unconscious, I opened the grating and staggered out upon the white gravel path that stretched away in two directions. My mind, stunned and chaotic as it was, still held the frantic craving for light, and not even the fantastic wonder which had happened could stay my course. I neither knew nor cared whether my experience was insanity, dreaming, or magic, but was determined to gaze on brilliance and gaiety at any cost. I knew not who I was, or what my surroundings might be, though as I continued to stumble along, I became conscious of a kind of fearsome, latent memory that made my progress not wholly fortuitous. I passed under an arch out of that region of slabs and columns and wandered through the open country, sometimes following the visible road, but sometimes leaving it curiously to tread across meadows where only occasional ruins bespoke the ancient presence of a forgotten road. Once I swam across a swift river where crumbling, mossy masonry told of a bridge long vanished. Over 2 hours must have passed before I reached what seemed to be my goal, a venerable ivied castle in a thickly wooded park, maddeningly familiar yet full of perplexing strangeness to me. I saw that the moat was filled in, and that some of the well-known towers were demolished, whilst new wings existed to confuse the beholder. But what I observed with chief interest and delight were the open windows, gorgeously ablaze with light and sending forth sound of the gayest revelry. Advancing to one of these, I looked in and saw an oddly dressed company indeed, making merry and speaking brightly to one another. I had never seemingly heard human speech before, and could guess only vaguely what was said. Some of the faces seemed to hold expressions that brought up incredibly remote recollections. Others were utterly alien. I now stepped through the low window into the brilliantly lighted room, stepping as I did so from my single bright moment of hope to my blackest convulsion of despair and realization. The nightmare was quick to come, for as I entered, there occurred immediately one of the most terrifying demonstrations I had ever conceived. Scarcely had I crossed the sill when there descended upon the whole company a sudden and unheralded fear of hideous intensity, distorting every face and evoking the most horrible screams from nearly every throat.
I'm not laughing.
Flight was universal, and in the clamor and panic, several fell in a swoon and were dragged away by their madly fleeing companions. Many covered their eyes with their hands and plunged blindly and awkwardly in their race to escape, overturning furniture and stumbling against the walls before they managed to reach one of the many doors. The cries were shocking, and as I stood in the brilliant apartment alone and dazed, listening to their vanishing echoes, I trembled at the thought of what might be lurking near me unseen. At a casual inspection, the room seemed deserted, but when I moved toward one of the alcoves, I thought I detected a presence there, a hint of motion beyond the golden-arched doorway leading to another and somewhat similar room. As I approached the arch, I began to perceive the presence more clearly, and then, with the first and last sound I ever uttered, a ghastly ululation that revolted me almost as poignantly as its noxious cause. I beheld in full, frightful vividness the inconceivable, indescribable, and unmentionable monstrosity which had, by its simple appearance, changed a merry company to a herd of delirious fugitives. I cannot even hint what it was like, for it was a compound of all that is unclean, uncanny, unwelcome, abnormal, and detestable. It was the ghoulish shade of decay, antiquity, and desolation, the putrid, dripping eidolon of unwholesome revelation, the awful bearing of that which the merciful earth should always hide. God knows it was not of this world, or no longer of this world, yet to my horror I saw in its eaten away and bone-revealing outlines and leering, abhorrent travesty on the human shape, and in its moldy, disintegrating apparel, an unspeakable quality that chilled me even more. I was almost paralyzed, but not too much so to make a feeble effort toward flight, a backward stumble which failed to break the spell in which the nameless, voiceless monster held me. My eyes, bewitched by the glassy orbs which stared loathsomely into them, refused to close, though they were mercifully blurred and showed the terrible object but indistinctly after the first shock. I tried to raise my hand to shut out the sight, yet so stunned were my nerves that my arm could not fully obey my will. The attempt, however, was enough to disturb my balance, so that I had to stagger forward several steps to avoid falling. As I did so, I became suddenly and agonizingly aware of the nearness of the carrion thing, whose hideous, hollow breathing I half fancied I could hear. Nearly mad, I found myself yet able to throw out a hand to ward off the fetid apparition which pressed so close, when in one cataclysmic second of cosmic nightmarishness and hellish accident, my fingers touched the rotting, outstretched paw of the monster beneath the golden arch. I did not shriek, but all the fiendish ghouls that ride the night wind shrieked for me, as in that same second there crashed down upon my mind a single and fleeting avalanche of soul-annihilating memory. I knew in that second all that had been. I remembered beyond the frightful castle and the trees, and recognized the altered edifice in which I now stood. I recognized most terrible of all the unholy abomination that stood leering before me as I withdrew my sullied fingers from its own. But in the cosmos there is balm as well as bitterness, and that balm is nepenthe. In the supreme horror of that second I forgot what had horrified me, and the burst of black memory vanished in a chaos of echoing images. In a dream I fled from that haunted and accursed pile and ran swiftly and silently in the moonlight. When I returned to the churchyard place of marble and went down the steps, I found the stone trapdoor immovable. But I was not sorry, for I had hated the antique castle and the trees. Now I ride with the mocking and friendly ghouls on the night wind, and play by day amongst the catacombs of Nefren Ka in the sealed and unknown valley of Hadoth by the Nile. I know that light is not for me, save that of the moon over the rock tombs of Neb, or any gaiety save the unnamed feasts of Nitocris beneath the Great Pyramid. Yet in my new wildness and freedom, I almost welcome the bitterness of alienage. For although nepenthe has calmed me, I know always that I am an outsider, a stranger in this century and among those who are still men. This I have known ever since I stretched out my fingers to the abomination within that great gilded frame, stretched out my fingers and touched a cold and unyielding surface of polished glass.
Morning Bulletin. Jim Daly speaking.
Jim, help me.
Anita, what's the matter?
I can't tell you, Jim, but it's happened. Oh, come out at once. You must help me.
That's how it started. On a hot morning in July, with Anita's fear-filled voice pleading with me over the telephone. I left the office, got out the car, and raced down the long, lonely road leading to that house in the hills. I didn't know what I might find when I reached that house. Anything could happen there, with Anita locked up all alone with her crazy guardian. The thought of my fiancée alone with that madman almost terrified me. For old Gideon Godfrey was insane. That's what I was afraid of. Anita told me that her uncle was hexing her, putting the curse of the evil eye on her. Nonsense, of course. Anita was too intelligent to believe such superstitions. But living there all alone under the power of that demented man, her sanity was going, too. I could see it. Lately, she had told me about something black. Something black that came into her bedroom at night. It was a sort of trailing mist, but it had a face and a voice. Both were horrible. It seemed to whisper to her when she was asleep, and then she would fight off the inky tentacles that clutched her body and wake up screaming. She called it an incubus, a night demon. She said Gideon Godfrey sent it to her. Yes, I had good reason to be afraid. The cunning maniac and the frightened girl, alone together in a lonely house, and now that phone call. When I pulled up before the house, I jumped out and made for the door. I didn't knock, but walked right in. Anita stood in the parlor at the far side of the room, waiting. She said nothing, just held out her arms. I moved across the room to embrace her, but as I walked, I stumbled over something. I looked down and saw what I had stumbled over. The body of Gideon Godfrey lay on the floor. The head split open and crushed to a bloody pulp.
Jim, help me. You must help me, Doc.
Of course I'll help you, but what happened?
Well, it was hot this morning. I was out in the barn. I felt tired. I dozed off in the hayloft. Then all at once I woke up and came into the house. I found my uncle lying here.
Wasn't there any noise? Nobody around?
Not a soul.
Somebody killed him with an axe. But where is the axe?
The axe? I don't know. It should be by the body if someone killed him.
Well, just a minute.
Jim, where are you going?
I'm going to call the police.
Oh, no, Jim. Don't you see? If you call them, they'll think...
What do you mean?
I did
It doesn't seem like you're ready to join us just yet. Join
That's
you?
right.
Yeah, no, I'm
It's a
just
pretty
passing
flimsy
through.
story, isn't it, Anita?
Tend to pass
If we only had a weapon, fingerprints or footprints or clues.
Yeah. It's nice here.
You're sure you were out in the barn when this happened?
Oh, yes?
Can't you remember more than that?
No, it's all so confused. I had one of my dreams, you know. The black thing came. I seem to remember I went out there for fishing sinkers.
Fishing sinkers? In the barn? Listen to me. You're not Anita Loomis. You're Lizzie Borden. Yes, she was like Lizzie Borden. I told her the story then, the story of Lizzie Borden. It was like the old jingle that began running through my brain. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. They had accused Lizzie Borden of murdering her parents one hot summer day after she came in from sleeping in the haymow. They said she took an axe to them. It was a famous case, and now Anita was shuddering in my arms.
Jim, don't tell me stories like that. Are you trying to compare me to that woman? Are you hinting that I took an axe to my uncle?
I'm not hinting anything, just pointing out how similar your case is to Lizzie Borden's.
Maybe that's the explanation of her case, too. Maybe she was possessed of a demon. Maybe the black spirit of murder descended upon her when she slept. Told her to wake up, take an axe, and...
Take it easy now, Anita. Stop it. There are no such things. You're just upset. We've got to think this thing out now.
I'm really just looking...
Eventually, we must call the police. We can't get around that. But right now, the thing to do is try and find that axe. We started to search for the murder weapon then. We covered every room. There was no axe. Finally, I sent Anita to look upstairs while I went over the parlor again. There was nothing. My head began to swim. It was hot, quiet. There was only silence and that body on the floor with its ghastly grin. And then, all at once, I saw it. It was like a cloud, a black cloud. But it wasn't a cloud. It was a face covered by a mask of wavering smoke. A mask that leered and pressed closer. I couldn't move. Then I heard something swish. I turned. It was Anita. As I grasped her wrists, she screamed and fainted. The black cloud over her face disappeared, oozed into air. As she fell, I pried something loose from her rigid hands. It was a blood-stained axe. I put her down on the sofa and went into the other room. I carried the axe with me. No sense in taking chances. I trusted Anita, but not that thing. Not that black thing that swirled up like smoke to take possession of a living brain and make it lust to kill. In the other room, I phoned the police and sat down to wait. What could we tell them? The truth? They wouldn't believe it. Wouldn't believe that an incubus could enter a human body and make it attempt a murder. But I knew how it must have entered into her, made her kill Gideon Godfrey. I felt the cool axe blade in my hand as I leaned back. A verse kept going in my head. Lizzie Borden took an axe. What was that? I woke with a start. At first, I thought the police had arrived. Then I realized it was thunder. A heat storm was breaking. I blinked and got up from the chair. Then I realized that something was missing. The axe was gone from my hands. Anita, she must have awakened while I slept, come in here and stolen the axe again. Yes, what a fool I was to sleep. The demon, it had come back to her, entered into her. I faced the door, saw the trail of blood. It was true. I ran into the other room. Then I gasped with relief, for Anita was still lying on the couch. I looked at the trail of blood on the floor. For the first time, I noticed that it seemed to lead away from her, not towards her. What did it mean? It meant she wasn't possessed of the demon now while she slept. Maybe the demon came to me when I dozed off. I was trying to remember. Where was the axe? Where could it be now? Then I knew everything. Knew that the demon had entered me while I slept. Knew what I had done. Because I saw that axe now, crystal clear. That axe, buried to the hilt, in the top of Anita's head.
You have just heard Craig Dennis in Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, adapted for radio by Robert Bloch. His story in Weird Tales magazine.
Stay tuned for terror.
In the meantime,
The Trouble. The events in this story took place in 1958 in a small white house in a suburb of New York City. The names of the people involved have been changed. Monday, February 3rd. Tom Lombardo and his sister Nancy had just come home from school. Tom was going on 13, Nancy was 14. They were talking to their mother in the living room when they heard a loud pop in the kitchen. It sounded like a cork had been pulled from a bottle of champagne, but it was nothing like that. the cap on a bottle of starch had somehow come unscrewed, and the bottle had tipped over and spilled. Then, bottles all over the house began popping. Bottles of nail polish remover, shampoo, bleach, rubbing alcohol, even a bottle of holy water. Each had a screw cap that took 2 or 3 full turns to open, but each had opened by itself, without any human help, then had fallen over and spilled. "What is going on here?" Mrs. Lombardo asked. Nobody knew. But the popping soon stopped and everything went back to normal. It was just one of those crazy things, they decided, and put it out of their minds. Thursday, February 6th. Just after Tom and Nancy got home from school, 6 more bottles popped their caps. The next day, at about the same time, another 6 did. Sunday, February 9th. At 11 o'clock that morning, Tom was in the bathroom brushing his teeth. His father was standing in the doorway talking to him. All of a sudden, a bottle of medicine began moving across the vanity by itself and fell into the sink. At the same time, a bottle of shampoo moved to the edge of the vanity and crashed to the floor. They watched, spellbound. "I'd better call the police," Mr. Lombardo said. That afternoon, a patrolman interviewed the family as bottles popped in the bathroom. The police assigned a detective named Joseph Briggs to the case. Detective Briggs was a practical man. When something moved, he believed that a human or an animal had moved it, or that it moved because of a vibration or the wind or some other natural cause. He did not believe in ghosts. When the Lombardos said they had nothing to do with what was going on, he thought that at least one of them was lying. He wanted to examine the house. Then he wanted to talk to some experts and find out what they thought. Tuesday, February 11th. The bottle of holy water that had opened a week before opened a second time and spilled. 2 days later, it spilled again. Saturday, February 15th. Tom, Nancy, and a relative were watching TV in the living room when a small porcelain statue rose up from a table. It flew 3 feet through the air, then fell to the rug. Monday, February 17th. A priest blessed the Lombardos' house to protect it against whatever was causing the trouble. Thursday, February 20th. While Tom was doing his homework at one end of the dining room table, a sugar bowl at the other end flew into the hall and crashed. Detective Briggs saw it happen. Later, a bottle of ink on the table flew into a wall and broke, spattering in all directions. Then another porcelain statue took off. It traveled 12 feet and smashed into a desk. Friday, February 21st. To get some peace, the Lombardos went to a relative's house for the weekend. While they were gone, everything at home was normal. Sunday, February 23rd. When the Lombardos returned, another sugar bowl took off. It flew into a wall and smashed to smithereens. Later, a heavy bureau in Tom's room toppled over, but no one was in the room when it happened. Monday, February 24th. By now, Detective Briggs had talked to an engineer, a chemist, a physicist, and others. Some thought that vibrations in the house were causing the trouble. These could come from underground water, they said, or from high-frequency radio waves, or from sonic booms caused by airplanes. Others said that the electrical system was the cause, or downdrafts coming through the chimney. The popping of bottles was blamed on chemicals the bottles contained. Tests showed that there were no vibrations in the house, there was nothing wrong with the electrical system, and there were no chemicals in the bottles that would make them pop. Then what was causing the trouble? None of the experts knew. But every day, the Lombardos received dozens of letters and telephone calls from people who thought they did know. Many believed that the house was haunted. They thought that a poltergeist was on the loose, the noisy ghost that is blamed when things move around on their own. No one has proved that poltergeists exist, but people everywhere have told stories about them for hundreds of years. And what they have told was not too different from what was happening to the Lombardos. Detective Briggs did not, of course, believe in poltergeists. He had begun to believe that Tom Lombardo might be to blame. Whenever something happened, Tom was usually in the room or nearby. When he accused Tom of causing the trouble, the boy denied it. "I don't know what's going on," he said. "All I know is that it scares me." People said that Detective Briggs was a tough cop who would turn in his mother if she did something wrong. But he believed Tom. Only now he didn't know what to think. Tuesday, February 25th. A newspaper reporter came to the house to interview the family. Afterward, he sat in the living room by himself, hoping that something would happen that he could describe in his story. Tom's room was just across the hall from where the reporter sat. The boy had gone to bed, but he had left his door open. Suddenly, a globe of the world flew out of the darkened room and smashed into a wall. The reporter dashed into the bedroom and turned on the light. Tom was sitting in bed, blinking as if he had just been awakened from a sound sleep. "What was that?" he asked. Wednesday, February 26th. In the morning, a small plastic statue of the Virgin Mary rose up from a dresser in Mr. and Mrs. Lombardo's bedroom and flew into a mirror. That night, while Tom was doing his homework, a 10-pound record player took off from the table, flew 15 feet, then crashed to the floor. Friday, February 28th. 2 scientists arrived from Duke University in North Carolina. They were parapsychologists who studied experiences like those the Lombardos were having. They spent several days talking to the family and examining the house, trying to understand what was going on and what was causing it. One night, a bottle of bleach popped its top, but that was all that happened during their visit. They did not tell the Lombardos about a theory they had that a poltergeist actually might be involved in such cases. According to this idea, poltergeists were not ghosts. They were normal teenagers. They had become so troubled by a problem that their emotions built up into a kind of vibration. Since it was taking place in their unconscious minds, they didn't even know it was happening. But the vibration somehow left their bodies and moved whatever it struck. It happened again and again until the problem had been solved. Scientists had given this strange power a name. They called it psychokinesis, the ability to move objects with mental power or mind over matter. No one knew if this really could happen or how to prove it. Yet most reports of poltergeists did involve families with teenage children, and there were 2 teenagers in the Lombardo family. Monday, March 3rd. The parapsychologists said that they would prepare a report on what they had learned. The day after they left, the trouble returned with a vengeance. Tuesday, March 4th. In the afternoon, a bowl of flowers flew off the dining room table and smashed into a cupboard. Then a bottle of bleach jumped out of a cardboard box and popped its top. Then a bookcase filled with encyclopedias fell over and wedged itself between a radiator and a wall. Then a flashlight bulb on a table rose up and hit a wall 12 feet away. Finally, 4 knocks were heard coming from the kitchen when nobody was in that room. Wednesday, March 5th. While Mrs. Lombardo was making breakfast, she heard a loud crash in the living room. The coffee table had turned over by itself. But that was the end of it. After a month of chaos, everything returned to normal. In August, the two parapsychologists gave their report. They decided that the Lombardos had not made up the story, nor had they imagined it. Their trouble had been real, but what had caused it? They said that no pranks or tricks were involved, nor was any magic. As the police had done, they also ruled out vibrations from underground water and other physical causes. The only explanation they could not rule out was the possibility that a teenage poltergeist had been at work, moving objects with mental power. They didn't have enough evidence to prove it, but it was the only answer they had. If it was a poltergeist, they thought it was Tom. If they were right, if a normal boy like Tom had become a poltergeist, this also might happen to other teenagers. It might even happen to you.